Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Lost Wisdom of the Grail Telesummit. My guest today is a landscape intuitive, a landscape architect and a teacher, and I have worked with him myself for many years and we've had some wonderful adventures together. He's also been a great help to me in the way I put my own personal space together with regards to my outside space, the garden. He is a man who is very, very deeply connected to the land. And without further ado, welcome, Jeremy. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I know you have some great insights and some great tools to share with people. So let's go straight in. And can I begin by asking you, what exactly do you mean by connection to the land and how do you work with it?
What I thought we'd look at today, we look at it in terms of three areas. In terms of, as you set it down, how it actually impacts on the body, how we have an impact on the earth and the landscape around, and then a little bit like you've referred to already, about how we can actually bring that into our own space and into our own gardens. For me, connection to land is absolutely fundamental to how I live, regardless of whether I was a landscape architect or not. It's just one of the key things that actually keeps me sane and keeps me working in this world. I strongly believe that a really good connection to the landscape and a way of working with the land can actually give us answers to questions that we're asking ourselves continually. It works for me time and time again. And that way of working with the land is through actually walking it, through actually being in it physically, in whatever way is possible for us. That's not to say we have to go off and climb mountains if that's not available, but actually the physical intention of setting within working with the landscape. And I also think that there is a correlation between how much we intervene into that landscape, but how much we can actually connect into it. I think there's also a balance in how we actually do intervene as well that can help correct that, but somehow the less intervention or the less management actually means we have a stronger connection to it.
So it's like the wild places, so is that what you mean? So the more managed, so I mean, I know you live in London.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, an incredibly managed landscape. So it's harder to get the connection in London than it is out in the countryside. Is that what you mean?
I think it is, but I think there's also a way that we can work to try and bring more of that balance in so that we can create that place within those environments that we live in. Because not all of us are lucky enough to live in sort of have access to the wild places.
Yeah.
But I do think that there has been a connection between us and those wilder places, which is stronger than it is when you're sitting and working in a city. Not that it isn't possible. The way that we've worked, the way that I work, I mean, fundamentally, I live in a city, so I'm always working with it.
Yeah.
But I always think that connection is also an exchange between the two. The land really values us working with it, and therefore it offers us things as an exchange. And once you actually engage with it, it doesn't withhold, it doesn't understand some of the processes of saying, well, you haven't seen me for 20 years, so what am I going to talk to you about? It doesn't get it. It doesn't work like that. If you have an intention and you want to work, it wants to work with you. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about it. Often I can feel how excited it is. And we both felt it. Suddenly it's like, oh, hello. Oh, wow. Excellent. Somebody's here.
Yes. Yeah.
You get a buzz, or I get a buzz from doing that.
Yeah. And that's about conscious connection, isn't it?
It is. It is about setting it up consciously in a way that you are setting a very strong and very clear intention about what you're actually doing with it as well. And there are sometimes that intention could be as loose as, I have this question, I don't understand what's going on, I want to get some insight into that. And working with the land can make you do that. I mean, that kind of fits very neatly into the kind of first area that I really wanted to sort of talk about.
Yeah.
Pilgrimage, which is really being used quite a lot at the moment, about how you can walk with the land. In fact, there are pilgrimages going on even today. I've seen on Twitter somebody's walking a pilgrimage route from Chichester to Canterbury to resurrect the old way of walking.
Yeah. Can you just explain a little bit about pilgrimage? Because a lot of people think of it specifically in regard to, a religious purpose.
Yeah.
But actually it's more than that, isn't it? I mean, that is just one aspect of it. And when you talk about pilgrimage, what do you mean by it?
A walk with intention, literally. I mean, I was speaking to a friend the other day who's an architect, and I was sort of saying that, actually it could just be your local walk to your park or to the shop or something. It's about the intention that you set down. It is about the walk that you want to do and the questions that you're asking yourself. So for me, turn it into a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Very much the destination isn't the reason for doing the walk. For me, it is the actual walk. And because of the way I work and the way that we all have a connection to the land, you can actually feel the changes as you walk through.
Yeah.
If you want to ask. I mean, I've been lucky enough working in London. There are often historic pilgrimage routes that you can use. So there are ones that actually have a potency to them.
Yes.
People have walked them before. You can get a sense of a lot of history. But that's not necessarily something that is absolutely necessary. There is one I use down in Hazelmere, which is a much more open and rural one.
Yeah.
It's of my creation. It works for me. I've found a space where I can really detach from myself and get out of my own way and then really hear what I need to hear myself telling myself. But that walk is beautiful, rural, but it's not historic. Been trawled by people who have just walked their dogs for millennia. It's not in that way. I mean, I'm sure it's been drawn, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so it's part of that intention. Now, what I like to do within that is to break it down into sections that I'm walking through. So in the one I do in London, I work with the sort of 7 gateways, which reflect 7 chakras in our bodies. Now, this is a system that I was taught by Peter and Sarah Dawkins, where it's creating a landscape temple. But for me, it really works in being able to ask questions, because each of the 7 areas refer to different chakras in the body. So starting with the root chakra and working way up to the crown. And I can feel it as we're talking about it. For the landscape ones we've done before.
Yeah.
Because each of those represents a different thing, from the root being your family or your tribe as you come to understand that term. And then moving all the way through to your relationships with other people, your relationship with yourself, the sort of the courage that you need, the wisdom, and you can feel as you walk each of those unfolding. And sometimes for me, it's actually, I feel really bizarre in this place, where last time I did this walk, I felt really upbeat. So it helps me question, well, so what's going on with my root, or what's going on here that I'm connecting into something different here? But I used to use it mainly because I suffered from a mental health issue of having lots of anxiety attacks. One of the key things about anxiety attacks is that fear and flight. You're not thinking, you're not anything, nothing's coming through. And to find a structure where I could walk, I could begin to understand what was happening to me. And I found it in different places, at different ways. Or sometimes it was the end. I'd literally stop, I'd settle, I'd be in the crown, which in this one that I've done is between the Tower of London and St. Paul's. So I'd be in St. Paul's. And whatever that in question was, whatever that intention I set at the beginning was, I'd get a response. And I always did, however bizarre it was, or however I couldn't have factored it in. In one of the walks, which is a very long one in London, between the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey, I arrived at a certain time, I sat down, and immediately over the tannoy came the somebody talking, saying that they were just about to do a prayer for all pilgrims who walk on this earth on our behalf. Literally what I've been doing. And then what was in the actual prayer was really directly relevant to what I felt I've been working with. it's that exchange that is just so amazing. And it's a dialogue.
Yeah, it's a completely conscious connection between you and the consciousness of the planet, effectively. And you set an intent when you set out, and you hold this intent through it, feeling into the earth you're walking on, as well as feeling into yourself.
Yeah.
And as you take that through the process, and am I right in saying, I just, for anyone who might be interested, that you do guided walks and pilgrimages in London and elsewhere? Yeah.
Yes, I've taken people
we'll
through.
talk about that maybe a bit more at the end.
Yeah, I've taken people through it because, I mean, it's, that was the best way for me to be introduced to it, to actually experience with people who experienced it before.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need you to have huge understanding of the chakras, because you're using them as keynote points for yourself to connect into things.
Yes.
You don't have to go off and study huge amounts about the chakras to actually understand. It's just the fundamental principles of what each one is.
Yes.
The one I do near Hazelmere actually is even simpler, because it's 3 stages. It's a walk to a point, which I always call my introduction. It's where I really connect into myself and what am I asking for? What am I needing? And then I get to use an old hollow way, where one of those ways that has been carved out by carts and carts in the stuff. And that's where I drop down, and it really is, it takes you right down into this landscape. And that's where everything that I need to come up comes up, and I'm walking and I'm listening and I'm in silence and I'm walking down and down and down into the landscape, and the landscape is holding me, always feels really strongly holding me.
Yeah.
And things are bubbling up, and then I get to the bottom of that, and it's a climb up. And for me, that climb up is where I leave behind, or I set down, or whatever it is that I no longer need to carry, or the answer I need. I let the landscape deal with it there in a gentle and beautiful way. It wants to help. It wants to take it away. It won't be left there for anybody else.
Yes, it's not dumped.
It's not dumped. It's kind of gently set down. The landscape takes it for you. And then I walk out. And the one thing I've always promised myself is that I never look back. I've taken that away and I just walk up. So it can be that simple.
Yeah.
You find a space where you feel, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this here, and I'm going to do that there. You don't need sort of 7 great marker points all over the place. It can be very simple, and each of those give you a response. And in many cases, I find I'm getting clarity over something I already knew, or a confirmation of something I already knew. And the landscape wants to celebrate that. It wants to support you in doing that. And through the walking, it's brilliant.
It is one of the things that I find so profound, and I think we forget it more often than not, is we don't just live on this earth. We are of this earth. We are part of it. We are very, very tied into its rhythms and its cycles and things like that. So when you talk about partnership, I mean, it really is a very close connection that we have, and you're just consciously re-establishing that, because so many of us have lost it, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and actually doing service to the land as well, because it needs that for us, for it to be able to respond to itself as well. It is definitely it meshes together for both of us.
It's a two-way process. And so when we talk about healing the land, healing the land or healing ourselves, it just reflects both ways.
I mean, it's perfect. I mean, it's just very, very simple. I mean, and in fact, the way the land gets it, we walk over the time. I mean, even in London, you're walking all over the place. It's just a lot stronger when you're walking with intention and you're actually acknowledging it and setting up a dialogue.
Yeah. And if more people did this, I mean, we were talking just a little bit earlier about the problems that are going on in London at the moment. And for those of you who are not aware, there's been a lot of stabbings in a very short space of time since the beginning of this year. And we were talking a little bit about, the psychic field in London is so intense. I mean, from someone who lives outside going into London, it kind of hits you like a brick wall. Whereas people living within this, most people are living unaware. But there is a consequence to it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, from what you're saying, if more people just consciously walked their way to work, you know, their journey to work within London every day, or, you know, they went out, whether they go outside into a park or whatever they do at lunchtime, that was a conscious process. It would help to clear some of this negative psychic field or energy that really sits within this quite concentrated space. Yeah.
That's what I believe. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are days when my walk to work isn't going to be a pilgrimage. It's just a head down.
Yes.
Most I try, if I, to actually set that intention when I walk out of Waterloo Station and walk down the river or something like that, that I'm looking at it and I'm giving it a conscious opportunity that if anything for me needs to come through, absolutely brilliantly, but also giving back as well.
Yeah.
To sort of move the space and move the energy and just to allow it. I mean, you're not always going to get great trumpets and bells and drums for something. Sometimes you get a wonderful little pat on the back, but
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've noticed in a lot of the work we've done over the years is actually what a sense of humour.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Occasionally I've not seen something and it keeps coming up until finally it's like, oh, finally you've seen it. It's like, yeah, okay, sorry.
Thank you. Moving on.
You didn't ask to go there, did you? And you get walloped. We all make it. It is often about that dialogue. So it is about asking as well. I mean, I think actually we should say that when you start, it is about asking, and if you get a sense of a no or it's not right, then you can ask again, is there anything I should do now? And sometimes you'll get a response that they want you to do a core around a tree or around something before you start, like a grounding. And then you're allowed to go, and sometimes it's like, just no, not today. We just have to honor that and respect it. But the most, whenever that's happened to me, it's something for my benefit. It'd be really good to ground yourself here, or take it a little bit of time or something. So that asking is always really, really important. And then at the end, which is why I sort of take people through these, is closing down, so that you give a strong intention that this is now finished, this is now done. So those two are just a housekeeping more than anything else. It's respectful to introduce yourself, and then it's respectful to say thank you and move on.
So I mean, the one thing that's coming out very strongly again is this tuning in, this consciousness, this tuning in to yourself as well as to the land. It's
it is, but I think
and listening to the answers. Excuse me. I mean, some people listening they may be listening for the I don't hear the voice, but it isn't necessarily that, is it? No. It can be a feeling of gut, a movement of energy, maybe a bird or a movement of wind or something. So it's being very alert to the signs both within your body and around you. You're not necessarily going to hear a voice booming from the clouds at you.
No, and people shouldn't be worried about that idea of connection in, and that, I don't do that or I can't do it. It's really bringing awareness. And that comes through a focus, through this is what I'm doing, which is why you're setting an intention. And then actually you tend to notice things that are going on around you, or you tend to notice more in your body about what you're feeling. But all of that, the landscape is incredibly forgiving. It's not, like I said, it doesn't withhold, but it's also not here to make it difficult. So you'll notice, and when I first started doing it, there were things I would notice that I get a much better and stronger sort of attention to. But nobody should be worried that they, because they don't feel it or see it or hear it in any particular way, you will find your own way of doing that. The landscape will respond to it. That's what it's there for. So
So help and healing for the body. You say you've used it to help you with anxiety issues, like that. But there's also, I mean, I would say from my point of view, there's also a very real physical health benefits as well, just from breathing fresh air, from being in the landscape. And I find it, I mean, it's balm to my soul. I couldn't live without beautiful countryside and things like that. It's just one of the things that I need to actually be in a good space on this planet, mentally, physically, emotionally. So yeah, a huge amount that can be offered at the level of the body.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, as I said before, the key thing about it is that it helps me find answers to things that I already knew the answers for, but I hadn't actually managed to get them in clear in my head. And that's what I use it for. And there's that balance between what then for it needs, but what I get out of it as well. And it has been remarkably useful for my time to be able to actually get that clarity and be able to find a process which I know will deliver something. Sometimes very surprising, but will always deliver something for me.
Yeah,
definitely.
Wonderful. So the next level of the container, the earth.
Yes, the earth.
Talk to me about that.
Well, this kind of brings into what I actually also do as an occupation, which is being a landscape architect. I mean, I call myself a landscape intuitive, and my occupation or my way of using that is actually through landscape architecture. For me, what a landscape intuitive is somebody who can go onto a piece of land and understand its needs. Then through the landscape architecture, I have to marry those needs, which are clearly things that I'm picking up on, with the needs of the client and what they actually want to happen with that landscape as well. And that's where I see design actually being, is how do we get those all together? Clearly with some clients, it's a very open dialogue, and with other clients, it's less so. But I can get a very strong sense, or pick up a very strong sense of the patterns of what's going on with the landscape, of what has happened in the past, and what now in terms of those patterns. I mean, it's very similar to when we talk about ourselves. Patterns in our own nature, some of them are helpful and some of them are unhelpful. We talked about chakras being in the body and chakras being in the land. It's exactly the same idea. There are some patterns that exist within the landscape which are really helpful to it, and we want to change, we want to grow. And there are other ones where we recognize that actually something has been done here, or something's been in a pattern has been sort of generated that actually we need to now let go of, and it's not helpful. I mean, as a kind of a example of that, I was looking at a site down in Kent, a large country house, which had been occupied by a number of different people. But it was very clear over time that at one point somebody'd occupied that landscape who was fearful of what was going to go on. And so they started to put defences up and boundaries up. And when you looked, everybody who then bought it had added extra layers and more layers on it. Now, that was nothing about the landscape or about the place. That was their own personal pattern of behaviour and fears that had been embedded in the landscape.
So somebody had imposed like this thought form or this psychic field very strongly there, and other people coming in had unknowingly latched into it.
I mean, the huge high security fence around what was uneducation, but it went all the way through the landscape. So the way they planted it, they blocked out lots of it, even down to the fact that you couldn't actually walk off the patio or terrace because they put little hedges all around it. So it wasn't actually a huge wall, but your flow around the whole place, it was defended. There was one compartment and another compartment and another compartment. And our job was to talk to the people that now own this and point this out and help them understand how we could make changes. That the landscape was crying out for those sort of changes. That pattern wasn't helpful and wouldn't be helpful to anybody living there as well. But it was an important stage of understanding, oh, hang on a second, something's going on here, what is it? And tuning into that and getting a response. And then talking to the people about how you can make those changes. But yeah, it's important in all of that to bring in what we've talked about before already about pilgrimage. I use that when I'm working with the landscape, but also to look at angels, divas, anything that is very, very present as part of that landscape. to be asking questions of. Like with the angels, I don't see in angels, but I can feel a presence. I can feel that there is something there.
So when you say angels, you're talking about an energy.
An energy over a landscape, yeah.
So a guardian energy, shall we say, of the landscape, something like that, yeah, of that area of the landscape, yeah.
There is a presence within that landscape that, having had itself being formed, has generated something that is loving and nurturing, but it's a presence there as well.
Yeah.
And
again, you can connect into that and work in relationship with that.
But even acknowledge it and just sort of have a dialogue with it. We talk about it being with the land, but there are other elements that need to be talked about as that as well. Yeah. And on this particular occasion, we had to make some rather radical changes to the landscape to make it work for the modern day family, lots of it. And we were fought all the way. It just wasn't flowing. And suddenly we realized that actually we hadn't acknowledged the energetic presence, the angel, the land, who in terms of what was there didn't see anything had changed. It was only us that knew that 3 of the site had been sold, that drives had gone, that everything was different. And what we were trying to do was to try and actually bring a sense of wholeness back to it. And it was fascinating. As soon as I started the pilgrimage, I started a dialogue with the landscape in a different way and understand why things had changed. Actually, the project started to flow, and we did get to where we needed to get to, and we did manage to do what we knew we needed to do for this place. But it was absolutely fascinating. I hadn't realized that, to all intents and purposes, it looked like nothing had changed.
Yeah.
Understand about ownership or boundary changes. It was like, well, it's all here. What are you doing? Why are you mucking around with me?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on a second. No, there are changes I think you should be more aware of.
Yeah.
And then it worked. So it's that, again, we talked about dialogue a lot today and the way it works, but it was about setting up an appropriate dialogue and acknowledging that there are other interests also at work here that we need to. And that's the beauty of doing it. It is understanding what those patterns are, understanding the needs of the landscape, and then marrying those with where we know that piece of land or that project or whatever needs to go. To deliver something that is not only beautiful, but is actually also of value to all parties in some way.
Can I just ask you as well how you cope when you can very strongly feel there's a certain that there's a need within the landscape, maybe for it to be opened up or something to be changed, or the flow of energy, has been blocked and it needs to be opened up, or whatever it might be. But you have a very resistant client. So the landscape, you're the piggy in the middle, really, aren't you, between the landscape and the client? The landscape is being very clear with you about, this is what I need. And the client is very resistant. How do you manage that? Because that's a very tricky one.
It is. Fundamentally, starting point is I have ultimate trust in the landscape. It will sort itself out.
Yeah.
Understanding that whilst I have a dialogue with this and I know there's an opportunity here, the choice may not be taken by everyone else that's involved. I also know that to push an agenda, I don't know how else things will play out. So what I can do is I can explain the best way I can about why I feel that it's really important that we take a piece of land in this direction, or this project in this direction, the benefits that I feel will accrue from it. If there is huge resistance, it might not be my assignment to be making those changes.
Yeah.
And so what I look to do is to do my best, but to do my best to protect what isn't required.
Yeah.
So that in the future, somebody else may well be able to choose to do this, or there may well be some changes because of what we've done, and something else might come up in the future. I can't know that.
Yeah.
But I do have an ultimate trust that the landscape will get what it needs in a loving and positive way for everybody. But it might not be my time or the right moment to push that.
Yeah. So what you're basically, if I'm hearing you properly, what you're saying is that you need to take your ego out of this and be prepared to accept compromise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and do it in a loving way so that
Yeah.
you have a sense of what you think the landscape needs, and you don't do anything that will damage that in any way. And that sometimes involves you saying, well, this isn't my project. This
Yeah.
doing that. What is interesting within the profession of landscape architecture is my first sort of responsibility is actually not to the client, it's to the land.
And yeah,
when you sign up as being a professional, it's my responsibility is to the land.
Yeah.
You have an out. I agree with the direction this is taking. And sometimes you will tussle with that. Should I be doing what? You have to trust that all will be well. The landscape will work. But that's always a difficult one, a really difficult one.
Yeah. Yes. And how would you we've talked about tuning into the landscape, listening to the landscape, for somebody who's listening in, how would you get them started on that? How would you begin to say, well, this is how you begin that process of listening in to somebody who's not used to it or is new to this?
It's really, it's an intention to start. It's an acknowledgement that this is something you want. And then it is heading out into a piece of landscape. Now, initially I'd use something that's really familiar to you, that because then you'll be able to pick up changes that you're experiencing. If you go off to somewhere entirely new that you've never been, what you're getting, you're not really sure, is this new? Is this me? What do I do? It is setting that intention that you really want to set up a dialogue with the landscape, that you want something to come from this. And it's setting up a very clear intention when you go out, go to somewhere familiar, set an intention and start to walk. And I find walking slower than I would normally do really helpful, because it immediately puts you in a different space from when you're walking that place. And just see what comes up. I've had great fun in suddenly seeing, okay, there's a bird that's suddenly really present, and then going back to look up, what does that mean? And you begin that dialogue, or suddenly you see this amazing tree that you weren't aware of before when you were looking at that walk, and finding, well, okay, it's an oak, and going back and having a look up and seeing if that means anything. And so you begin to start to tune yourself in to walking with the land. You can do it in your own garden as well. Absolutely. You can take a point and start walking around somewhere and seeing what else you notice, what comes in. There will be things that will pop up. You'll notice a flower. They often start with symbols of things before you feel it inside you. So take a look at all of that.
Yeah. So again, just for those who are maybe unaware, there's a symbology. Particularly in this country, there's a lot of old druid lore and things around plants, around trees, and they hold a lot of symbology and a lot of meaning within them. So it's and again, there's plenty of books out there that help you to interpret that. Our ancestors saw this land as alive, living presence, and that it spoke to them in many different ways. It spoke to them through the plants, through the trees, through the animals, through the feelings in your body. So is this we're going back to? You're like a modern day druid in some ways.
It is, but it's very simple. A lot of what we get faced with now is incredibly complicated, and we have to learn it. We have to understand it. We have to go to books, and we have to work out what that button does if I press that. Whereas it is actually very simple. It's very, very straightforward. You go out for a walk, and suddenly you're really aware that you're seeing a lot of blackbirds. There might be something in that. So go and have a look and see whether it means anything to what you were asking for.
Yeah, whether it resonates.
How it resonates, and just begin that dialogue. But begin it today, and begin it with a question, and begin it with an intention to want to do that. That's the important part of it.
Yeah, and as you say, start somewhere you know. Yeah, which kind of brings us into the garden, doesn't it?
It does. Well,
For a lot of us.
If you have a garden, it's a place that you know. It's
Yeah.
a place that you know.
Yeah.
And we've already touched on parts of the things that you can start looking at, because it is a resource for you, however small it is. There is a way that you'll be able to walk it. There'll be able to a way to go out. A friend of mine literally has made a commitment to want to start to have a better dialogue. So she will go out every morning and walk on the lawn in barefoot, and notice what she noticed from that day. So,
and that is, I mean, everything else aside, just walking barefoot on the earth in itself is a massive health boost.
It is, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, because you're grounding yourself into it all. It's really important. I mean, often when you've done pilgrimages and you're sort of all charged up, the best way to do it is literally just to take your shoes and socks off and just stamp around a bit to try and bring yourself down.
Yeah, and ground yourself back in.
The
energies can take you up and away, can't they?
And even if you're feeling stressed or you're feeling wired, actually doing that, just, I mean, regardless of where I am in London, I mean, I have to be slightly careful with what's actually on the grass, but apart from that, getting my shoes and socks off and just stamping around for a bit, and nobody wants to notice you do it in their life. It doesn't really matter. So those sort of things, but it's we talked about patterns. Have a fresh look at your garden, see what it is that you inherited, what it is you've done, and see whether you can see anything that follows on from that. Or, certainly with gardens I've worked in, you look at it with people with fresh eyes, and they can suddenly see, well, actually, yes, this person, a friend of mine, we were working with her garden, and it was very clear that the people before had been very good at how things looked, but behind the scenes, it really didn't work. And so when we started to unpick it, we could see a pattern that she'd begun to do as well, of plastering, putting a plaster over everything. I'll put a plaster over that, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Put a plaster over that. And suddenly it was like, well, actually, no, we really need to look now at what the foundations are to this, or about why has this been done. And being able to unpick that with her actually helped her in her own life, but actually being reflected in the garden.
Yeah.
Very clear. Those patterns in us can be reflected in our own space.
Yeah.
So take a look.
Well, you've been very helpful to me in the past in other gardens I've had. In the last garden in particular was I say we created, because it was very much with your help, a garden that everybody loved to be in. It was very harmonious, and we established a very clear chakra system to it, and very clear areas within it. Jeremy, I moved relatively recently, about 6 months ago, and Jeremy is helping me do the same again with the garden I've got here. Because this garden is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's exactly what you're talking about there. So do you want to kind of use this as a little bit of an example?
I'm happy to. I wouldn't want to do that without your permission. It was hysterical. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, you live in a beautiful part of the country. You live with fields all around you. And when we were walking around it, we were looking at it, it felt really bizarre. And you yourself said, it feels really cut off. And when we kind of got that inspiration, we started looking at it, and everything had been hemmed in, had been cut off from everything else that was going around. They were either through a sense of fear of that, or an uncomfortableness with the fields and the expanse of it. But you have a beautiful brook at the bottom of your garden, and the previous people had blocked it off with carports and sheds and fences and log stores, and then created a water feature in front of it with a waterfall, whereas you had this amazing sound and everything else going on. Now, for them, it may well have been incredibly important that feeling of safety and wanting to recreate that was really part of who they were and what they needed. And so there isn't a sense of disrespect of that, because they did what they needed to do for them. But for somebody moving in, it's absolutely important to understand, what was that pattern? What was the energy that they needed? Does that fit with me? And for you, the reason you'd move there was for the fields and the beauty and the landscape. And so to have to live with that, I would imagine that would have an impact on you and the way that you wanted to work. So moving it away and clearing it.
So there's been quite a clearing, hasn't there?
was absolutely vital. And that has made a huge shift in the space, because you really embrace the landscape around you, and the work you do will respond. I mean, I've never seen so many birds coming to your garden as when I was there last. I mean, it literally was like some sort of dining centre for birds, and they weren't in everybody else's gardens. They were literally just focused into yours. It was amazing, absolutely amazing.
And that's something else as well. I think it's probably worth making people aware of, is that if you work consciously, even in a small space like your garden, if you consciously connect into the nature spirits, and into the flows of energy within the garden, when we say it responds, nature responds. So you're saying that, there's a lot more nature in my garden than other people's. It's because there's that energetic container that attracts them in, basically. And it brings these wonderful rewards, doesn't it? It is constantly a two-way dialogue.
And it's not, it's not that it has to be huge or amazing. It's literally that sense of nurturing. If you're looking at your space and you're looking about what nurtures you, looking at, even if it is all you can do is actually just look out at it and enjoy it, that's enough to get the connection going. I think it's important, especially in this day and age where everybody sort of sees, they have to, the makeovers, you have to do your garden, you have to do all of this.
So it's got to have the decking, and it's got to have the
landscape. It flows underneath all of that.
Yes.
It's much more about that connection, about that nurturing. So if what you can do is to sit at your window and look out at the birds, that is a connection. If it's walking the garden and somebody else does the maintenance of it, fine, absolutely fine. All these levels, it's that intention and that connection and that sense of nurturing of it.
It's reminding people thought is energy.
Absolutely. And that's what, really, really true. That's where it gets to, because I wouldn't want people to assume that you have to have certain things to be able to get these connections. It's all available to all of us, whoever we are, wherever we are. And because the landscape wants it, it needs it, it really yearns for our connection again to it. Respond in whatever form you can give it. Absolutely.
So just very, very quickly, if someone was wanting to create a chakra garden, how would you suggest they start? A chakra system within their garden to get this harmony, this sense of harmony.
Well, there's two things. One, we always have to deal with the practical. Okay, and my old boss always used to say the first thing about looking at a new garden is, where do you want to have your morning cup of tea or coffee or whatever it is that hits you in the morning? You want to have your gin and tonic, glass of wine, whatever it is, in the evening. Look at the garden in terms of how you will actually enjoy using it. Now, for some people, that can be in the sun, but for other people, it can be absolutely the opposite. So what is it for you that will work for those two kind of pivotal points of the day? Once you've done that, so that you'll go out there and enjoy it rather than seeing it as being somewhere you can't go in, you can then start looking at it at a different level. My recommendation is always, and it was one that Peter and Sarah Dawkins used to tell me as well, look for the heart. Look for somewhere in that garden where you feel there is a centre, a piece to it. Now, it might not be in the very centre of the garden, and it might necessarily be something huge and dramatic. It's likely to be quite a small space. It's
often quite quiet, isn't it? It's, it's that still small voice.
When people talk about, we want to create the heart centre of this master plan, and they want it to be all fountains and all sorts of, it's probably not the heart centre. The heart centre
will be ego.
Being quieter and being beautiful, being that. So literally start walking your garden and start feeling, where does it feel really calm and where does it feel really centered? And then once you think you've got somewhere like that, you can start looking for the either ends, the root and the crown. inevitably, when we're looking at those two things, one of the first things is levels. You know, the root is more often at a lower level than anything else, or it's the start point rather than the end point. Because that's often when you're talking about pilgrimaging, you would pretty much always start at the roots. You can start at the heart, but you probably you'll start at the root, and then you can begin to get that balance. So you've got the center of the heart, you've got the root, and then you've got the crown. And it's starting to look at those, and then looking at how you would want to acknowledge those in some particular ways, and you can start to build something. I mean, there are lots of examples of chakra gardens where people have very much defined 7 sections. My way of working is more flow than that. I want the garden to feel like one thing. Rooms can be different. It's not getting into too much detail of design, but it's acknowledging it in some way for you, so that if you feel you need that space, that you know where you go. So you can stand there, you can sit there, you can just be there. Some people's gardens are very small, so you're just looking at a sense of where you feel that connection to something quiet, something beautiful. It can even be there's a great view at that point. And it's like, that could be a heart center. So.
I think it's worth saying here as well, because so many people are familiar with the Eastern chakra system, which is shown really in a linear way. But actually a chakra system doesn't have to be a straight line. No, it can be a curve, it can be a circle, it can be and in fact in the Celtic system it's actually a spiral. So don't get caught in that kind of linear thinking about it.
No, the landscape isn't rigid.
Nor should we be, but that's another story.
Honestly, I mean, it is incredibly forgiving, and these sort of things as we're learning. So it is a case of just getting out there and having a crack at it, and actually just seeing what comes through for you, and talking about it, because other people will be experiencing it as well. So it's lovely to share it as well. Really lovely to share.
Wonderful. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but we're running out of time. The theme of this whole summit is about healing the wasteland of modern living, whether it's within us or without us. What would you suggest to help people both with healing the wasteland, and also what is the hope that you have, that you carry forwards for us as a race at this very pivotal time where we are?
I think in terms of the healing of the wasteland idea, it's always been about this dialogue for me, the landscape. I know we've talked about it as we've gone through today, but it really is about a communication with the land, setting that up in your way for you. Because I think because we have so removed ourselves from that, it has become something that we have to now set aside time to do. We have to factor it into everything. We no longer go on the journeys we used to go on. And I think that we can make a real contribution by just restarting something in our own lives in whatever way works for us. Moving through the land and moving on the land in whatever way, and whatever physical ability we have as well. We shouldn't forget that it's all possible for everyone, whatever physical ability you have.
It's conscious connection,
a conscious thing about the way you move through it. And I think my main hope is that we step out of where we've taken ourselves, and we call in what we are. I think what we've done is we've called in where we are, as in the place, this wasteland that you were talking about. And our next choice is actually to call in what we are as individuals, as unique individual people. I think that feels to me like the most important thing now to acknowledge, that we are all unique. We are all individual. And whereas we've been calling in so many things outside of ourselves, we now need to call in, well, what am I? What am I?
Or what do I want to be? What do I aspire to be?
All of that, but it's focusing it on the I and the me, and therefore what else goes on around me, but we've all been calling in, actually just comes because of knowing that.
Yeah.
What am I? And I think I've always felt that actually the landscape can play a really pivotal role in taking those small steps, because it doesn't withhold its information, it doesn't withhold its communication. So get out there, make your intention, start a dialogue with it, extend your dialogue if you already do it, and those answers will come.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been, it's been wonderful. And this sense of connection, this sense of conversation, this sense of partnership and relatedness with the land, that's come over so strongly.
We're very much in everything that you're doing at the moment. I love the symbols of all that interconnectivity between the body, the home, the earth. It's all really important.
Yes, it is just waking us up to this. I mean, it's a way of knowing that our ancestors had, a way of living and being in the world that our ancestors had, that we've lost somewhere along the way. We've see ourselves as separate and apart, and we're not. And as you say, the moment we re-establish that connection, the land responds. It wants to work with us, and we have an ally if we did but know it. Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful communication.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. Now, for those of you who want to learn some more, or would actually even like to do some pilgrimages, walk some pilgrimages, or have Jeremy sort of show you a healing path or something like that you can do for yourself, you can contact him through his website, jeremyrye.com. But thank you, Jeremy. I can't thank you for your time enough. And keep on with the good work.
Thank you. Lovely. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.